My heart pounded erratically as I walked down Madison Avenue toward Riverside Memorial Chapel in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. The April sun beat down on the asphalt, creating those heat waves that blur your vision. But I barely felt the sweat running down my forehead. My hands trembled holding the worn baseball cap I always carried with me, the same one Mr. Robert had given me 15 years ago when we first met on that rainy winter morning. The clothes I wore were the best I had. Faded but clean jeans, a white button-down shirt I'd found at a donation center, and black shoes that, though worn, I'd polished the night before until they gleamed. I knew I wasn't dressed like the others who would surely be there, but I needed to be present, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude and love. The scent of lilies and air conditioning hit me as soon as I entered the funeral home's lobby. The beige marble floor reflected the fluorescent lights, creating a solemn atmosphere that made me swallow hard. People dressed in black conversed in small groups, their voices forming a constant, respectful murmur. Men in dark suits and black ties, elegant women in discreet dresses with jewelry that sparkled subtly under the artificial light. I stood out completely in that scene. I remained on the edges of the room, trying to go unnoticed while I searched for the chapel where Mr. Robert was being viewed. A funeral home employee, in her impeccable uniform with a professional expression, approached and whispered discreetly, "Are you family?" Her question carried a polite but suspicious undertone. I was Mr. Robert's friend," I replied, my voice choked with emotion, gripping the cap firmly between my hands. She nodded with a protocol smile and directed me to the main chapel. "Chapel B, sir. My condolences." I walked down the hallway carpeted in deep red, passing religious paintings and expensive floral arrangements. The sound of my steps was muffled, but I still felt like I was making too much noise. With each step, my anxiety increased. I knew it would be difficult, that I might not be welcome, but Mr. Robert deserved my presence there. The chapel door was slightly ajar. I stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and entered. The atmosphere was even more imposing than I had imagined. Rows of chairs upholstered in burgundy velvet extended toward the altar, where the mahogany casket was covered by an impressive arrangement of white roses and calla lilies. The walls were decorated with stained glass windows that filtered natural light, creating soft reflections on those present. The air was thick with expensive perfumes, and the scent of flowers mixed with the characteristic smell of polished wood. I looked for a discreet place in the back of the chapel. There were about 50 people scattered across the front rows, family members, close friends, work colleagues, all dressed appropriately for the occasion, all clearly belonging to a world different from mine. I sat in the last row, carefully placing the cap on my knees. From there, I could see the casket, and more importantly, I could pay my final respects to the man who had changed my life forever. That's when I saw him. In the right corner of the chapel near the altar, there was a small reserved area, and there was Max, Mr. Robert's golden retriever. The dog was lying down but alert, his brown eyes constantly scanning the environment. Even from my distant position, I could notice how lost he looked, searching for something or someone he would never find again. My heart tightened at the sight of him. Max wasn't just Mr. Robert's pet. He was his faithful companion, his silent confidant. In the last months, when Mr. Robert's health began to deteriorate, Max never left his side. It was as if the animal knew, through that inexplicable instinct that dogs possess, that his owner needed special care. The first tears began to roll down my face when I remembered the mornings I would arrive to work in Mr. Robert's garden and find the two of them on the front porch. The gentleman sitting in his favorite rocking chair, reading the newspaper, while Max dozed at his feet, always alert for any need his master might have. If you're enjoying this real and emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters. The murmur of conversations around me brought me back to the present. Family members were arriving and taking their places in the front rows. I heard fragments of conversations about business, inheritances, properties, words that sounded strange at such a moment, where we should only be remembering who Mr. Robert really was as a person. An elegant lady with perfectly styled grey hair approached the area where Max was and made an impatient gesture toward a funeral home employee. "Please remove that animal from here. It's not appropriate for the ceremony," she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. My blood boiled. Max wasn't that animal. He was family. He was the most faithful companion Mr. Robert had in the last years of his life. I wanted to stand up, wanted to speak, but I knew my position there was already delicate. A man of my social condition confronting a family lady would be interpreted as disrespect. Fortunately, a young man I recognized as Mr. Robert's younger nephew intervened. "Aunt Margaret, Uncle Robert left specific instructions. Max should stay. It was his wish." The lady huffed irritably but didn't insist on the matter. Max remained where he was, like a silent guardian watching over his master one last time. More people continued arriving. The minister, dressed in his black vestments, positioned himself near the altar and began organizing his materials for the ceremony. The electric organ emitted its first melancholic notes, filling the environment with a melody that touched directly to the soul. It was at that moment that Max raised his head. His ears perked up, and he began to sniff the air as if he had caught a familiar scent. Slowly, the dog stood up and began to walk along the side of the chapel, following some invisible trail that only he could perceive. And then our eyes met. Max stopped in the middle of the center aisle, staring directly at me. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Those brown eyes, normally cheerful, were loaded with profound sadness, but also with something I can only describe as recognition and relief. The dog began to wag his tail slowly, hesitantly, as if he wasn't sure whether he could show joy at such a solemn moment. But his eyes didn't lie. He recognized me, remembered all those years I worked in the garden of his house, remembered the games, the caresses, the moments when I shared my lunch with him. Some people began to notice Max's movement, and discreet whispers spread through the chapel. The dog, completely ignoring social protocol, began to walk slowly toward me. Max continued walking toward me, his steps echoing softly on the chapel's marble floor. With each meter he approached, I felt the weight of gazes turning toward me. Whispers began to spread through the front rows like waves on a calm lake. "Whose dog is that?" I heard a female voice ask in a low tone. "It was Robert's," someone replied. "But why is he going all the way back there?" My heart raced. I knew this moment would come, but I wasn't prepared for the intensity of the shame I felt when dozens of pairs of eyes fixed on me, some curious, others clearly uncomfortable with my presence there. Max reached my row and without hesitation placed his head on my knees. His golden ears were drooped, and I could feel a slight tremor in his body. The poor animal was suffering as much as I was, perhaps more. Instinctively, I began to stroke his head, whispering words of comfort. "Hey, boy." "I miss him too," I murmured, trying to control the emotion in my voice. It was at that moment that the cutting voice echoed through the entire chapel. "Excuse me!" The tone was loud enough to overcome the organ sound and make all conversations cease instantly. A corpulent man, approximately 50 years old, wearing an impeccable grey suit and a golden tie, stood up from the second row and turned back with an expression of indignation stamped on his face. I recognized him immediately. It was Maurice, Mr. Robert's older nephew, a successful businessman who visited his uncle only on special occasions, birthdays, Christmas, and when he needed some financial favor. Mr. Robert always spoke of him with a mixture of pride and disappointment. Pride for his professional achievements and disappointment for the emotional distance he maintained from the family. If you want to know how this uncomfortable situation unfolds, subscribe to the channel to follow all the chapters. Maurice adjusted his suit and took several steps toward me, his face red with contained rage. The silence in the chapel was deafening. Even the minister stopped leafing through his pages to observe the scene that was unfolding. "Who invited this beggar?" he asked, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. His voice echoed through the chapel walls like thunder on a silent night. The impact of the words was like a punch to the stomach. I felt my face burn with shame and humiliation. Around me, people began to murmur among themselves, some with expressions of discomfort, others clearly agreeing with Maurice. Max sensed my tension and pressed his head harder against my legs, as if trying to give me strength. "Maurice!" The voice came from the front row. It was Mrs. Helen, Mr. Robert's younger sister, a lady in her early 60s, who had always been kinder when we met at the house gate. "Please, maintain respect. We're at a wake." "Respect?" Maurice laughed bitterly. "Where's the respect for my uncle? Where's the respect for our family? This man shouldn't be here." I felt every fibre of my being wanting to get up and run from there. The humiliation was almost unbearable. But then I looked at Max, who remained faithfully by my side, and remembered all of Mr. Robert's words about dignity and courage. "Carlos," he used to say during our talks in the garden, "a man isn't defined by the clothes he wears or the money he has in the bank. A man is defined by his actions and the love he carries in his heart." I breathed deeply and stood up slowly, holding my cap firmly between my trembling hands. My voice came out low at first, but gaining firmness with each word. "I apologize if my presence is causing discomfort. I just wanted to say goodbye to Mr. Robert. He was very important to me." "Important?" Maurice let out a sarcastic laugh. "You were the gardener, an employee. You have no place here among family and close friends." The words hit like stabs, but something inside me rebelled against that injustice. Mr. Robert never made me feel like just an employee. He treated me with dignity, taught me about books, about life, helped me in the most difficult moments. "Maurice, please, Mrs." Helen intervened again, her voice loaded with embarrassment. "There's no need to make this scene." "Scene?" Maurice turned to his aunt. "The scene is having a stranger here, disturbing our farewell. Look at him." He gestured in my direction with contempt. "Old clothes, unkempt appearance. What will family friends say? What will Uncle Robert's business colleagues say?" The minister, a middle-aged man with a paternal expression, finally intervened. "My son," he addressed Maurice with a calm but firm voice, "we are in God's house. Everyone is welcome to pay their final respects." "With all due respect, Father, but you didn't know my uncle like we did. You don't know the standards he maintained, the social circle he belonged to." While Maurice spoke, I noticed that several people in the chapel were clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Some averted their gaze, others whispered among themselves. A lady in the third row was shaking her head in disapproval. It wasn't clear whether it was directed at me or at Maurice. Want to discover how this tension resolves? Don't miss the next chapters. Subscribe now. Max, who had remained quiet during the entire discussion, suddenly got up and went to Maurice. For a moment, I thought the dog was going to greet him, but instead, Max sniffed his expensive shoes for a few seconds and then returned to me, lying down at my feet in a clear demonstration of where his loyalty lay. The dog's attitude didn't go unnoticed by anyone. Some whispers became more audible. "Look at that. The dog chose. How strange." Maurice, clearly irritated by Max's demonstration, took a few more steps toward me. His presence was intimidating. He was taller and more corpulent than I was, and his social position gave him a confidence I didn't possess. "Listen carefully," he said, lowering his voice so only I and the closest people could hear. "I don't know what kind of relationship you think you had with my uncle, but this is a private family event. You don't belong in this place. Have the dignity to withdraw before I have to call security." His words were like poison, destroying any remaining confidence I still maintained. I looked around the chapel and saw that indeed I was different from everyone there. My simple clothing contrasted starkly with the elegant attire of the other attendees. My skin, weathered by outdoor work, contrasted with the well-cared-for complexions of these people who spent their days in air-conditioned offices. I began to question whether Maurice wasn't right. Maybe I really shouldn't be there. Maybe my presence was really disrespectful to Mr. Robert's memory and his family. "Max," as if sensing my hesitation, stood up again and looked directly into my eyes. In that canine gaze, there was a silent plea, a request that I not abandon him too, that I not abandon the memory of the man we both loved. And it was at that moment, with all the chapel's eyes fixed on me, with Maurice waiting for me to submit to his social pressure, that Max did something that completely changed the course of that situation. The dog walked slowly to his master's casket, placed his front paws on the base, and let out a low, melancholic howl that echoed throughout the chapel. It was a sound of pure pain, of irreparable loss, of unconditional love that knows no social barriers or prejudices. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even Maurice dared to interrupt that moment of pure, canine emotion. And then Max returned to where I was and lay down again at my feet, making it clear to everyone in the chapel that, regardless of what humans thought, he had chosen where he wanted to be in that moment of farewell. Max's howl still echoed in my ears when I realized that something had changed in the chapel's atmosphere. The sound had been so pure, so loaded with genuine pain, that even Maurice remained silent, his face losing some of its previous rigidity. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw several people discreetly wiping away tears. Max returned to me, but this time he didn't just lie at my feet. The dog positioned himself between Maurice and me, like a golden shield protecting someone he considered part of his pack. His brown eyes were alert, fixed on the grey-suited man, who still looked at me with hostility. "That doesn't change anything," Maurice murmured, though his voice had lost some of its previous authority. "A dog doesn't know how to distinguish social classes. That doesn't mean that—" His words were interrupted by a fragile but determined voice coming from the front row. "Maurice, sit down, now!" Everyone turned to see who had spoken with such authority. It was Mrs. Carman, Mr. Robert's older sister, an 82-year-old lady who rarely raised her voice, but when she did, the entire family listened. She was leaning on an elegant cane, her white hair impeccably arranged in a bun, wearing a simple but perfectly cut black dress. "Aunt Carman, you don't understand," Maurice began. "I understand perfectly," she interrupted him, striking the cane on the floor once. The sound echoed through the chapel like a judge's gavel. "I understand that you're making a shameful spectacle at your own uncle's wake." The embarrassment on Maurice's face was visible. Some people began to shift uncomfortably in their chairs, clearly realizing that the situation had taken an unexpected turn. If this story twist is moving you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the entire story. Mrs. Carman began to walk slowly toward us, leaning on her cane. Each of her steps seemed to echo not only on the marble floor, but in the respectful silence that had taken control of the environment. When she reached where I was, she stopped and studied me for a long moment. "You're Carlos," she said. It wasn't a question. I swallowed and nodded, my voice coming out in a whisper. "Yes, Ma'am. Robert spoke about you," she continued, her blue eyes faded by age but still penetrating. "He spoke a lot, especially in recent months." I felt my heart accelerate. "Did Mr. Robert speak about me to the family?" I looked quickly at Maurice, who seemed as surprised as I was by this revelation. "My brother said you had magic hands for plants, but mainly that you had a good heart." Mrs. Carman paused, allowing her words to echo through the chapel. "He said you were one of the few truly honest men he met in his life." Tears began to flow down my face without my being able to control them. I never imagined that Mr. Robert spoke about me that way to his family. "Aunt, but—" Maurice tried to intervene again. "But nothing, Maurice." Mrs. Carman turned to her nephew with an expression that mixed disappointment and authority. "Do you really want to have this discussion here, at this moment in front of God and all the family friends?" Max, who had remained quiet during the entire conversation, suddenly got up and went to Mrs. Carman. The dog sniffed her delicately and then returned to me as if he were officially introducing the family matriarch to the man he had chosen to protect. Max's attitude brought a sad smile to Mrs. Carman's face. Max was always a good judge of character. she said, looking at me again. "Robert used to say he trusted his instinct more than many people's judgment." A murmur of agreement spread through the front rows. I realized that some people were nodding their heads as if they finally understood something that had gone unnoticed before. "Ma'am," I managed to say, my voice still choked, "I don't want to cause problems. I just wanted to say goodbye to him. Mr. Robert he changed my life." Mrs. Carman placed a trembling but gentle hand on my arm. "Tell us, son, how did Robert change your life?" I looked around the chapel. All the attendees were looking at me now, but the hostility from before had transformed into something different. Curiosity, perhaps even genuine interest. Maurice himself, although still visibly upset, remained silent. I began hesitantly. I was going through a very difficult time in life. 15 years ago, I had lost my job in construction due to a back injury. My wife had left me, taking our children. I was practically living on the streets. Don't miss the continuation of this emotional story. Subscribe now to the channel. I paused, trying to control my emotion. Max sensed my anguish and leaned his head against my leg, offering the silent comfort he always knew how to give. One day, I was looking for work in the neighborhood, going door to door, when I arrived at Mr. Roberts' house. It was raining hard, it was winter, and I was soaked and hungry for days. Instead of sending me away like everyone else had done, he invited me in. Mrs. Carman nodded encouragingly, her eyes shining with contained tears. He gave me dry clothes, hot food, and offered me work taking care of the garden. But more than that, my voice failed for a moment. More than that, he treated me like a person, like someone who deserved dignity and respect. The silence in the chapel was absolute. Even the children present seemed to understand the importance of the moment. During all these years, Mr. Robert wasn't just my employer. He taught me to read better, lent me books, helped me reconnect with my children. When my ex-wife finally allowed me to see them, it was Mr. Robert who gave me money to buy them gifts. I saw several people in the chapel discreetly wiping their eyes. Mrs. Carman herself could no longer contain her tears. In recent months, when his health began to worsen, I did more than take care of the garden. I helped him with shopping, with medications, stayed talking with him in the afternoons when he felt lonely. And Max, I looked at the dog who remained faithful by my side. Max and I became a team taking care of him. Maurice, who had remained silent during my entire account, finally spoke, but his voice was different, lower, less hostile. Why didn't he tell us these things in detail?" Mrs. Carman answered for me, her voice loaded with a sadness that went beyond the recent loss. "Because you never asked, Maurice. Because you only showed up here when you needed something or on special dates. Robert was always discreet about his good deeds." The impact of these words was visible on Maurice's face and several other family members present. I realized that many were beginning to understand that maybe they didn't know Mr. Robert as well as they thought. Max, as if sensing that the moment was right, got up again and walked to the casket. This time, instead of howling, he simply lay down beside it, placing his head on his paws and closing his eyes. It was as if he were saying, "It's okay now. He's at peace, and I found someone who can take care of the memories we shared." The weight of silence in the chapel made me realize that everyone expected me to continue speaking. Mrs. Carman had sat in the chair next to me, a simple gesture that meant more than all the words of acceptance I could have received. Max remained lying beside the casket, like a faithful guardian fulfilling his final mission. "Can I tell you how I really met Mr. Robert?" I asked hesitantly, my voice still choked with emotion. Several silent nods. Even Maurice, who had created all that confusion, now looked at me with a different expression, no longer hostile, but with genuine curiosity. I breathed deeply and let the memories flow. It was July 2009. I remember the date exactly because it was the day my life changed forever. I had just left a homeless shelter in downtown Manhattan, carrying only a plastic bag with some clothes and a piece of paper with addresses where I might find work. I closed my eyes for a moment, reliving that cold and grey morning. The rain started suddenly, the way it only happens in New York winters. In minutes, I was soaked and shivering with cold. My last hope was a list of houses in the Upper East Side, where they might need a gardener or someone for general services. If you're moved by this real story, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any detail. I knocked on 7 houses before getting to Mr. Roberts. In all of them, the answer was the same. Either they didn't need anyone, or they simply slammed the door in my face when they saw my appearance. I stopped, remembering the frustration and desperation of that moment. When I rang the bell at the brownstone with the garden full of rose bushes, I was ready for another rejection. I had decided that if that one was also negative, I would return to the shelter and try to think of another plan. Mrs. Helen, Mr. Robert's younger sister, leaned slightly forward. And what happened when Robert answered? He opened the door wearing that navy blue robe he always used in the mornings. A sad smile crossed my face. Max was beside him, still young at that time, wagging his tail. The first thing Mr. Roberts said wasn't, "I don't need anyone," or "Come back another day." He said, "My God, you're soaked. Come in, let's get you some dry clothes." I noticed that several people in the chapel were smiling through their tears. That instant generosity was exactly the kind of attitude that defined who Mr. Robert really was. He took me to the guest bathroom, gave me a clean towel and a set of clothes that had belonged to his late neighbor's husband, clothes he kept specifically for moments like that. Then he took me to the kitchen and prepared coffee with milk and buttered toast. Max raised his head when I mentioned the kitchen, as if he also kept special memories of that place. His eyes looked at me for a moment before he went back to resting his head on his paws. While I ate, Mr. Robert didn't ask invasive questions about how I had gotten to that situation. Instead, he asked about plants. He asked if I knew how to take care of gardens, if I knew about pruning, about fertilization. When I said I had learned some things from my grandfather in childhood, his eyes lit up. Mrs. Carman whispered, "Robert always loved plants. It was a passion he inherited from our mother." He took me to the backyard and showed me the rose bushes that had pests, the ornamental plants that needed pruning, the grass that was uneven in some spots. Then he did something no one had done for me in months. He offered me a real work opportunity, with fair wages and dignified treatment. I paused to control the emotion that threatened to overwhelm me again. But Mr. Roberts' generosity went far beyond work. In the first week, he realized I didn't have adequate housing. Instead of firing me, he fixed up the servants' quarters that had been empty for years and offered it to me as temporary housing. "Temporary, that lasted 15 years, said Mrs. Helen with an affectionate smile. He said it wasn't charity, that it was a fair arrangement. I took care of the garden, the external cleaning of the house, small repairs, and in exchange I had housing and salary. But I knew it was much more than that. It was dignity. It was the chance to rebuild my life. Don't miss the next chapters of this moving story. Subscribe now. Over the months, our relationship evolved from employer and employee to something much closer to true friendship. Mr. Robert realized I had difficulties with reading. I knew the basics, but couldn't read more complex texts. Instead of judging me, he began to teach me. The memory made me smile through the tears. Every afternoon, after work in the garden, he would call me to the front porch of the house. We had 2 chairs there, and he would bring books. We started with newspapers, then magazines, and gradually got to real books. "What kind of books?" asked a young man I recognized as one of Mr. Robert's grandsons. "A bit of everything." He said a man needed to know the world through words, not just through experience. We read books about American history, about plants and gardening, some classic novels. He had infinite patience with me. Maurice, who had remained quiet during my entire account, finally spoke. He never told us about that. "Mr. Robert was discreet about his good deeds," I replied. "He said that true generosity doesn't need an audience. But you need to know that he spoke about all of you with great love, always." I saw that these words touched Maurice deeply. His face, previously hostile, now showed a mixture of remorse and curiosity. In the last 5 years, when my situation stabilized and I managed to rent my own small place, Mr. Robert insisted I continue working for him. But he said that if I wanted to look for other clients to supplement my income, he would help me get referrals. And did he succeed? Asked Mrs. Carman. He did. Today, I take care of the gardens of 6 houses on the Upper East Side, all his referrals. He helped me build a reputation, taught me about basic administration, about how to deal with clients. He transformed me from a man with no prospects into a respected gardener in the area. The pride in my voice was impossible to hide. Mr. Robert not only saved me from the streets, he helped me build a dignified life. But the greatest blessing he gave me was different from all that, I continued, my voice becoming more emotional. 3 years ago, when my ex-wife finally allowed me to have contact with my children again, Mr. Robert was the one who encouraged me not to give up. He was the one who lent me money to hire a lawyer when necessary. He was the one who advised me on how to regain their trust. Tears now flowed freely down my face. Today I have a wonderful relationship with my 2 children. They visit me every weekend, and Mr. Robert always made sure to meet them, to talk with them, to treat them as if they were his own grandchildren. Max got up again and came to me, as if he sensed I needed comfort at that moment. I stroked his golden head while I continued. That's why I needed to be here today, not as an employee paying final respects to his employer, but as an adopted son saying goodbye to the man who gave him a second chance in life. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. It was no longer a silence of judgment or discomfort. It was a silence of understanding, of respect, of recognition of a truth that had been revealed. The impact of my words resonated through the chapel like waves on calm waters. I realized that several people were now crying openly, not just for Mr. Robert, but for something greater they had just understood about the true nature of the man they were mourning. Mrs. Carman was the first to break the silence, her voice tremulous with emotion. Robert never told us details about you, Carlos, but he always said he had a disguised angel taking care of his garden. Now I understand that you were angels for each other. Max, as if understanding that the atmosphere had completely changed, got up and began to circle the chapel, no longer as a lost animal looking for his master, but as a silent host introducing the important people in his life to each other. First he went to Mrs. Carman, who petted him gently, then to Mrs. Helen, who whispered affectionate words in his ear. I need to apologize. Maurice's voice cut through the air, loaded with a humility that wasn't present before. He approached me with hesitant steps. Carlos, forgive me for the way I treated you. I didn't know. I had no idea of the importance you had in my uncle's life. I extended my hand to him, which he shook firmly. You don't need to apologize, Mr. Maurice. I understand. You were protecting your family's memory in your own way. No, he shook his head. It wasn't protection. It was prejudice. It was ignorance. Maurice looked around the chapel, then returned his eyes to me. My uncle always tried to teach us about humility and empathy, but I was too busy with my business to pay attention. Mrs. Helen stood up and came to where we were. Carlos, can I ask you a personal question? Of course, Ma'am. How was Robert in his last months? We knew his health was deteriorating, but he always said he was fine when we asked. I sighed deeply. That was the most difficult part of the whole story. He tried to hide it from you, because he didn't want to be a burden. Mr. Robert was too proud to admit he needed help, but I noticed everything. How he took longer to get up from his chair, how he sometimes forgot to take his medications, how Max became increasingly protective of him. If you're moved by these revelations, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the end of this touching story. Max, hearing his name, came to me and sat down, as if he knew he was being praised for his dedication to his master. In the last 3 months, I began spending more time here, not just to take care of the garden, but to keep him company. I discovered that Mr. Robert felt very lonely, especially at night, so I started staying for dinner a few times a week. Did he cook? Asked Mrs. Carman with a sad smile. He tried, I laughed through the tears. But I ended up taking over the kitchen. Mr. Robert taught me the recipes he learned from his mother, and I cooked. Those were the most special moments. Him sitting at the kitchen table, Max at his feet, and me preparing dinner with all my love. I stopped to control the emotion that threatened to overcome me again. In recent months, when his health began to decline, Mr. Robert made me a confession that I carry in my heart to this day. He said his greatest sadness wasn't dying, but feeling that maybe he hadn't been a good example for the family, that maybe he had distanced himself too much from you because of business and responsibilities. Maurice lowered his head, clearly touched by these words. I told him he was wrong, that you loved him deeply, but that modern life sometimes separates us physically without separating our hearts. And it was true. I could see your love in your eyes when you arrived here. Mrs. Helen was crying silently, remembering all the lost opportunities to demonstrate that love. Mr. Robert taught me that true love isn't measured by the frequency of visits, but by the permanence of feelings. He spoke of each of you with immense pride. Maurice, he always said you had inherited the family's intelligence for business. Mrs. Helen, he was proud of your career as a teacher, said you had inherited the gift of teaching from your grandmother. The people mentioned smiled through their tears, recognizing the affectionate words Mr. Robert really said about them. And Mrs. Carmen, I looked directly at the matriarch, he always said you were the family's wisdom, the person who kept everyone united even when physical distance tried to separate them. The elderly lady nodded, clearly moved to know that her younger brother saw her that way. If you believe in the transformative power of love and second chances, subscribe to the channel. But I also want to talk about Max, I continued, looking at the golden retriever who remained vigilant by my side. In recent years, Max wasn't just Mr. Robert's dog. He was his confidant, his faithful companion, his source of joy on difficult days. Max wagged his tail gently, as if he knew he was being honored. Mr. Robert asked me to take care of Max because he knew I would understand the importance of that unconditional love. Max taught me, along with Mr. Robert, that true loyalty knows no social barriers, doesn't judge by appearance, doesn't measure by what we have materially. I raised my eyes to the entire congregation, and that's what I want to leave as the legacy of Mr. Robert's words. True love, genuine generosity, and the ability to see human potential even when others see only failure. Maurice stood up. Carlos, may I say something? I nodded and he came to the pulpit. I want to apologize publicly, he said, his voice firm but emotional. Not just to Carlos, but to all my family and friends present. Today I almost made a terrible mistake. I almost expelled from my uncle's farewell exactly the person who cared for him most in his final years. Maurice's brutal honesty caused a silent impact in the chapel. Carlos made me realize that I didn't know my uncle as well as I thought, that maybe I inherited his intelligence for business, but not his wisdom for human relationships. That's going to change starting today. Reddit. He turned to me. Carlos, I want you to know that from now on, you are officially part of this family. And Max, too. You will always have a place at our table, in our celebrations, in our lives. The applause that echoed through the chapel was spontaneous and loaded with genuine emotion. There's one last thing, I continued when the applause ceased. Mr. Robert left a letter for me, which he asked to be read only after his passing. I pulled from my shirt pocket a yellowed envelope. With trembling hands, I opened it and read the final words of the man who saved me. Carlos, my dear son of the heart, if you are reading this, it means our earthly journey has come to an end, but our friendship remains eternal. Thank you for giving me purpose in the last 15 years. Thank you for showing me that true family is not defined by blood ties, but by bonds of love and loyalty. Take care of Max, take care of yourself, and continue being the good man you have always been. Your father of the heart, Robert. The silence that followed was absolute. There was no longer any doubt about my place there, about the legitimacy of my love for Mr. Robert, about the family we had formed beyond social conventions. This story proves that true love overcomes any prejudice. Subscribe for more stories that touch the soul. Max got up one last time and walked to the casket. He delicately placed a paw on the polished wood and remained there for a few moments, as if saying goodbye properly. When he returned, he didn't come to me. He went straight to Maurice and sat at his feet. It was as if Max was saying, "Now you understand. Now we are all one family." Maurice knelt and petted Max, whispering, "I promise we're going to take good care of you, boy. And Carlos, too." The minister began the ceremony with gentle words about Mr. Robert, but when my turn came to speak, I felt the weight of responsibility to properly honor the memory of the man who changed my life. Max was lying by my side, like a silent symbol of the connection that transcended social prejudices. I stood up slowly and walked to the podium. The entire chapel watched me in respectful silence. I breathed deeply, holding firm the words I had prepared in my heart during so many years of gratitude. 15 years ago, I was a broken man, I began, my voice resonating softly through the chapel walls. I had lost everything: work, family, dignity, hope. I was literally living on the streets of Manhattan, looking for any opportunity to start over. I paused, looking at the attentive faces before me. Maurice was in the front row now, his eyes red from crying, but with an expression of deep respect. Mr. Robert didn't just offer me work that rainy day. He offered me something much more valuable: human dignity. He saw me not as a beggar, not as someone inferior, but as a human being who deserved a second chance. Mrs. Carmen nodded encouragingly, her hands joined in silent prayer. During all these years, Mr. Robert taught me that true wealth isn't in the bank account, but in the ability to transform lives. He didn't just give me employment. He gave me back my self-esteem, reconnected me with my children, helped me build a dignified life. Max raised his head when I mentioned Mr. Robert's lessons, as if he too kept special memories of those silent teachings. This real story is touching many hearts. Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring content. But what impressed me most about Mr. Robert was his silent generosity. He never made a point of anyone knowing about his good deeds. I discovered by chance that he financially helped a widowed neighbor with 3 small children. I discovered that he discreetly paid for the medical treatment of a former employee who had developed cancer. Whispers of surprise spread through the chapel. It was clear that not even the family knew completely the extent of Mr. Robert's kindness. In recent months, when his health began to decline, Mr. Robert made me a confession that I carry in my heart to this day. He said his greatest sadness wasn't dying, but feeling that maybe he hadn't been a good example for the family, that maybe he had distanced himself too much from you because of business and responsibilities. Maurice lowered his head, clearly touched by these words. I told him he was wrong, that you loved him deeply, but that modern life sometimes separates us physically without separating our hearts. And it was true. I could see your love in your eyes when you arrived here today. YouTube Mrs. Helen was crying silently, remembering all the lost opportunities to demonstrate that love. Mr. Robert taught me that true love isn't measured by the frequency of visits, but by the permanence of feelings. He spoke of each of you with immense pride. Maurice, he always said you had inherited the family's intelligence for business. Mrs. Helen, he was proud of your career as a teacher, said you had inherited the gift of teaching from your grandmother. No, the people mentioned smiled through their tears, recognizing the affectionate words Mr. Robert really said about them. And Mrs. Carmen, I looked directly at the matriarch. He always said you were the family's wisdom, the person who kept everyone united, even when physical distance tried to separate them. The elderly lady nodded, clearly moved to know her younger brother saw her that way. If you believe in the transformative power of love and second chances, subscribe to the channel. But I also want to talk about Max. I continued, looking at the golden retriever who remained vigilant by my side. In recent years, Max wasn't just Mr. Robert's dog. He was his confidant, his faithful companion, his source of joy on difficult days. Max wagged his tail gently, as if he knew he was being honored. Mr. Robert asked me to take care of Max because he knew I would understand the importance of that unconditional love. Max taught me, along with Mr. Robert, that true loyalty knows no social barriers, doesn't judge by appearance, doesn't measure by what we have materially. I raised my eyes to the entire congregation, and that's what I want to leave as the legacy of Mr. Robert's words. True love, genuine generosity, and the ability to see human potential even when others see only failure. Maurice stood up. "Carlos, may I say something?" I nodded and he came to the podium. "I want to apologize publicly," he said, his voice firm but emotional. "Not just to Carlos, but to all my family and friends present. Today I almost made a terrible mistake. I almost expelled from my uncle's farewell exactly the person who cared for him most in his final years." Maurice's brutal honesty caused a silent impact in the chapel. "Carlos made me realize that I didn't know my uncle as well as I thought. That maybe I inherited his intelligence for business, but not his wisdom for human relationships. That's going to change starting today." He turned to me. "Carlos, I want you to know that from now on you are officially part of this family, and Max too. You will always have a place at our table, in our celebrations, in our lives." The applause that echoed through the chapel was spontaneous and loaded with genuine emotion. When the ceremony ended and we began to head to the cemetery, Mrs. Carmen stopped me by the arm. "Carlos, Robert left a will. Did you know?" "No, Mom. He never mentioned anything about it. He left you the cottage in the back of the property, officially, and an amount, so you can continue taking care of the garden and Max for as long as you want." My heart almost stopped. Mr. Robert had thought of everything, even ensuring I would have security after his departure. "But more than that," Mrs. Carmen continued, "he left a letter for the entire family, telling your story and asking us to treat you like the son he never had." I looked back and saw Max walking among the family members, already accepted, already loved, already an integral part of that family that moments before had questioned my presence. As we walked under the hot New York sun toward the cemetery, I realized that Mr. Robert had achieved his final miracle, uniting people who barely knew each other adequately through the power of unconditional love and second chances. Max's loyalty had been the catalyst that opened everyone's hearts to the truth about who Mr. Robert really was, and about who I had become thanks to his generosity. As we carried together the casket of the man who taught us about true family, I understood that some blessings only reveal themselves completely when we are willing to look beyond appearances and prejudices. Mr. Robert had departed, but his legacy of love, generosity, and second chances would continue living in each one of us, and Max would always be the golden reminder that true loyalty knows no barriers. In that moment, as we carried the coffin under the blue Manhattan sky, I knew that Mr. Robert's story didn't end in that cemetery. It would continue in every act of kindness I performed, in every hand I extended to someone in need, in every moment I chose to see human potential above circumstances. Max walked beside us, no longer as a lost dog, but as the living symbol that true love transcends death, and that genuine loyalty can change hearts and unite families in ways we never imagined possible.